Hello. Today we will continue to deal with statehood. The first lecture on statehood was about the fact that the architecture of statehood, i.e., a set of bodies of state power, their functions, their interconnections with each other, should be correlated with the entire function of governance. If this is not the case, then there will be big problems. However, it is not organizational staff structures that work, but people. People, they are what they are. And it's characteristic of people to build systems of unformalized relationships on the basis that their interests coincide or mutually supplement each other. Systems of unformalized relationships are characterized by dynamic distribution of responsibilities and powers in the course of their functioning. This is conditioned both by the personal composition of such people, as well as those circumstances to which they react in one way or another. Well, such a vision was opened up that such systems of unformalized relationships between people, when the activities of a character which is perceived by others as criminal or antisocial, are called mafias. And if the activity is regarded as an everyday self-evidence, or no attention is paid to it, then such systems are not named mafia, although the principles on the basis of which they are built are the same as those on the basis of which mafias are built. Therefore, the well-known phrase from the Soviet movie, Unbelievable Adventures of Italians in Russia, "The mafia is immortal," truly has a life-consistent basis. The only question is whether the mafia is of a criminal, antisocial character, or the formed mafia is an organic part of life, and is not of an antisocial or criminal character. Moreover, mafias of an antisocial and criminal character are not always the same, because in certain cases both the activity of mafias and the activity of state power can, by strength of various reasons, be of an antisocial character, but not of a criminal character. And the activity aimed at the development of society, the resolution of its problems, this activity, from the position of this type of statehood, will be perceived as criminal. And accordingly, some repressive measures will be taken. Therefore, if we turn to the past, then both Christ and Muhammad were criminals in relation to the societies in which they were born and began to act. Their activity was not of an antisocial character, but in relation to the life arrangement that existed, they were anyway criminals. Therefore, the Russian proverb says, "Sinless before God, innocent before the Tsar." It indicates where state governance should move, if it does not do what it should do in the stream of providence. Statehood is, first of all, a system of structural governance. But along with the fact that state power is a system of structural governance, at the same time state power is a generator and organizer of structureless governance towards various kinds of processes. Politology, in the form in which it has developed in the West, is governorially illiterate. Therefore, it does not have one methodological view on the character of state governance, and it deals with various kinds of particularities, not always considering them correctly. But if we consider the theme, the state as a generator of structureless governance, as an organizer of systems of structureless governance, then we certainly come across what is called jurisprudence and law enforcement practice. The question arises, first of all, when and for what did it appear? Well, if we turn to history, then at the dawn of civilization, always, in all societies, there were some ethical codes that forbade doing something and obliged doing something. Such codes of ethics were usually small in volume, and each person, if not literally, then by content, knew them as a whole. But the life of society became more complicated, and there appeared a need to resolve all sorts of situations that arose en masse in the life of society using standard methods. Therefore, the expansion of the set of standard situations, the principles for resolving each of these situations, normalizing obligatory actions, or normalizing some prohibitions on actions in such situations, ultimately gave rise to what is now called written legislation and law enforcement practice. Furthermore, it so happened that the volume of written legislation became such that an ordinary person, a member of society, was no longer able to know and remember all this legislation. And in order to govern the system of written legislation, professional jurists were required. The apotheosis of the activity of jurists is the principle, everything that is not prohibited by law is permitted. there is only one word left in the defaults: unconditionally permitted. This unconditionally permitted is the main secret of all modern jurisprudence, and at the same time, this is the main danger to society, which is generated by all jurisprudence and law enforcement practice in their historical form. The thing is that when the unwritten ethical codes were in force, they were generally known, but since they did not describe the entire set of life situations that people faced, it turned out that a lot in life was done on the basis of self-evidences. These self-evidences that were not announced, either in ethics or in ethical codes, like the 7 Commandments, the 10 Commandments of the Old Testament, the Sermon on the Mount, the 5 Pillars of Islam, and others, nonetheless also acted in life precisely because the ethical codes were not divorced from life, and only the most significant of this or that society was announced in them, and everything else remained at the level of self-evidences, which in general were not discussed simply because it was self-evident. And when jurisprudence adopted the principle, what is not prohibited by law is permitted, and in the defaults they remained unconditionally permitted, then jurisprudence actually elevated written laws to the rank of objective laws of being, to which all life and society should and can be devoted. But this is far from being the case, because a person can, by virtue of self-concoction, write any laws, create any legislation, but nonetheless, 6 groups of the objective laws, to which the life of people are subordinate, will remain in the foundation. These are pan-biospheric objective laws that regulate the formation of biocenoses and interaction of biological species with each other. These are species-specific objective laws that we are partially not aware of, but which determine our life and manifest themselves in these or those cultural shells, have a continuation in culture. Further on, there are noospheric religious, ethical in their essence objective laws, socio-cultural objective laws, economic and governorial objective laws. And in general, all written legislation should in some way take into account these objective laws and not contradict them. Because if the objective laws are violated in the life of society, then there will be all sorts of troubles. If the life of society flows in accordance with these objective laws, then everything will be fine and society will develop. And accordingly, the written legislation should be built in such a way that it does not oblige people, does not oblige business, does not oblige the state authorities to violate these objective laws, from under the power of which humanity cannot egress in principle. But the juridical mentality, in which the principle, everything that is not prohibited by law is unconditionally permitted, operates. And this unconditionality, that is, the unlimitedness of what is permitted, not prohibited by law, quite often comes into conflict with the objective laws. By force of the fact that jurists usually know nothing besides jurisprudence, insisting on let the world collapse, but the law be fulfilled, ultimately leads to the fact that the world will collapse under the impact of the persistent application of laws, without correlating them with the factual circumstances in which they are being tried to apply. Or the application of laws that contradict the objective laws inevitably entails one or another damage to society as a whole, damage to nature, people personally, and in potential this can lead as a minimum to a catastrophe of culture, and as a maximum to a global catastrophe of civilization. Therefore, the question of the juridical system in every state is a very delicate question that should be considered precisely in the context of correlating legislation with the objective laws of being, and at the same time is necessary to understand that legislation and law enforcement practice are instruments, by the state, for organizing structureless governance. When all members of society, physical and legal entities, act at their own discretion, but with an eye on the written legislation that regulates certain aspects of life. The circumstance puts us before the question of the requirements that we must present to any legislation. Well, first, this is undoubtedly the consistency of legislation with the objective laws of being. Revision of the current legislation on the theme of which objective laws of being it supports, and which it violates, or creates prerequisites for violation, if it's implemented without correlation with the factual circumstances of life, in which certain statutory provisions of the law are implemented. So if you approach the legislation of any state from such a standpoint, then you can detect several components in it, each of which is functionally purpose consonant. The first component is what is designed to ensure standard governance towards the most typical everyday situations faced by physical and legal entities. The second component is intended to ensure that the emerging conflicts of particular governances are resolved in a way that is guaranteedly acceptable for society as a whole, or for the governing elite. One of the constituents of this component is criminal law, that is, a crime of people against other people, encroachment on property, life, other socially conditioned rights guaranteed by the state, which are regarded as a real threat to social stability, and therefore are involved in the criminal legislation, but not in any administrative offences for which other liability is provided. It was said here that the legislation in this component is intended to govern standard situations and to resolve conflicts of particular governances. But if we are talking about governance, it means that the legislation is conceptually conditioned. And accordingly, if the state power supports, by its actions, one conception of governance, then the legislation in one way or another will express the objectives inherent in this conception of governance. In one way or another, it will express the ways to achieve these objectives, which in this conception of governance are recognized as normal and acceptable. And a conceptually conditioned legislation. The conception leads to the fact that any legislation in one way or another must contain a component that protects governance according to the conception supported by the state from governance which in the same society at the same time works towards achieving the objectives that in this conception are not presupposed at all or are forbidden. To put it another way, there is a component that is intended to protect governance in accordance with the current conception from governance that exercises other conceptions in the same society. In fact, it so happened that liberal propaganda supported the opinion that in the USSR it was precisely this component, aimed at protecting socialism and the country's constitutional system, that violated human rights, hinting that in the West it was all completely different, and human rights were not violated there. But this is a lie, because in the West, and in all states, this component is also present, in particular in the Federal Republic of Germany, where there were bans on professions, according to which members of the Communist Party had no right to hold certain positions in the state service. What is this? From the point of view of liberalism, this is a violation of human rights. But from the point of view of governance, this is not a violation of human rights, but the protection of the conception of governance followed by the statehood of the Federal Republic of Germany from the exercising in the same society of a conception that was incompatible with the accepted one. If you dig through the legislation of all countries of the world, you can find something that relates specifically to this component. But the textbooks related to jurisprudence, law, do not consider legislation precisely as a system for organizing structureless governance of the life of society, do not single out those functions that legislation and law enforcement practice are designed to solve. And therefore, much that is governarially significant either does not receive proper coverage, or is interpreted, you can't say incorrectly, but at least incompletely, which does not give an adequate understanding of the role of legislation in the life of society, as a result of which a certain number of jurists are schizophrenized and convinced that the written legislation, and the fact that they know it, make them the most erudite and capable people in society. This is far from the case. But there is a certain way of thinking that is typical for jurists as for professionals in a particular field, and this way of thinking does not always enable them to correctly see what happens in society, correctly see tendencies of social development, and correctly react to them. The second side of the question is related to how law enforcement practice is carried out. Law enforcement practice can be carried out in two different ways. A normal governorial variant, a correct one, ensuring the functional operability of legislation, and if legislation really expresses the interests of the broad masses of the population who live by their own labor, then this ensures in society both the authority of legality and the authority of law enforcement agencies and officers. The point is that if an event occurs in life, then you can look at the current legislation. Is this event described or not? If this event is described, then it falls under the action of certain articles of the current legislation. And further questions arise. Do the norms of legislation in relation to this type of event correspond to the social interests the interests of social development or not. If they correspond, then in the vast majority of cases, the application of the legislative norm is justified because it leads to a blagorious, socially useful result. If there is an event, but the legislation does not say anything about it, then this event can be governed according to one's own discretion, proceeding from certain considerations, self-evidences. And there can be no claims to the fact that this event is governed in this way from the point of view of legislation and law enforcement practice. But there is another approach to the implementation of laws. Many words, terms, legislative provisions do not have an unambiguous connection with reality. That is, they are not completely metrologically consistent. And the connection with reality is set by the person who is vested with the rights to apply this current legislation. And if the legislation is ambiguous, then opportunities open up to act according to the principle. Our law is like a draft pole. Where you turn it, that way it goes. This principle, in principle, cannot be eliminated, because a really written text correlates with real life in the overwhelming majority of cases in an ambiguous way. And therefore, in fact, law enforcement practice should be based on the generation of a certain tradition, which makes it possible to link legislation and life in a way acceptable for social development. And in this case, legislation is able to perform the function of one of the instruments of structureless governance of the life of society. But the abuse of the principle, our law is like a draft pole, where you turn it, there it goes, allows in the end, with references to legislation, to give legal force, the semblance of legal force, to any decision taken according to one's own discretion. And legislation, provisions of laws, their articles, in this case are used precisely in order to give legal force to an obviously based on one's own discretion decision that has nothing to do with real life, with facts. And when such a system takes shape, when in society, legislation is applied in accordance with the second approach, that is, it is not life that is correlated with the law, but legislation is pulled over decisions based on one's own discretion that have nothing to do with the interconnections of life and law. Then we factually get approximately what is the case in post-Soviet Russia, when legislation, firstly, contradicts objective laws, and secondly, its provisions are vague. And the vagueness of its provisions opens up a wide opportunity for the use of articles of the law in order to justify anyone's discretionary decisions, including ethically wrong ones. Well, we have a lot of such loops in the laws, and the law enforcement practice is really such that in our country anything can be painted as extremism, because in the current legislation there is no clear and juridically binding definition of extremism, and much more is absent. So if we evaluate this law enforcement practice, then it is based on the sociological, politological, and general social philosophical illiteracy of jurists who do not see any objective laws regulating the lives of people, do not see the interconnection of this legislation with these objective laws, do not see conceptions of governance, which society follows, do not see the vices of conceptions, and accordingly it turns out that law enforcement officers themselves act in accordance with the second principle, when the norms of the law are pulled over life situations according to one's own discretion. They destroy both the authority of legislation and the authority of the law enforcement system, and generate in society a situation that they themselves call legal nihilism, the generators of which they are, when they do not correlate life situations with the norms of the current legislation, but do the opposite. There is an unacceptable situation for someone who can in some cases be quite legitimately called an orderer. The orderer requires a certain resolution of a given situation, and after that, this or that decision is substantiated by the articles of the law, a decision which can be as unprevious and antisocial as you like. And here another question arises. This is the question of the place of the Criminal Procedure Code, its purpose in the life of society. I will remind you about an episode from the Soviet movie The Meeting Place Cannot Be Changed, where the Inspector Zhiglov plants on the pickpocket named Kirpich a wallet which Kirpich had already gotten rid of. Well, in the end, Kirpich goes to prison. Young Inspector Sharapov is surprised and gets the explanation. The thief has to be in jail. And this explanation, this position, is supported by the society. and many law enforcement officers follow it. Therefore, from their point of view, violations of the procedure code are acceptable, but the procedure code is not meant to keep a thief in jail. The main purpose of the procedure code is completely different. The main purpose of the procedure code is to create conditions for the investigation under which a knowingly innocent person cannot be brought to trial, and an obviously unprevious guilty verdict cannot be passed against this person. That is, the functions of the procedure code, its purpose, is not that which can be gleaned from the movie, the meeting place cannot be changed. Because if you follow Zhiglov's position, then the procedure code is not needed at all. It is simply an obstacle to the investigation. And if society agrees with the position that the procedure code is an obstacle to the investigation and the thief has to be in prison, then this opens a window of opportunity for transferring the law enforcement system to the mode of operation of the Holy Inquisition. The mode of operation of the Holy Inquisition does not require any evidence and evidence base at all, because everything works according to the principle. You know, yesterday one kind-hearted Christian told us that you have committed a sin before the Lord. If you repent, we will kill you painlessly and quickly, and we will burn your carcass in the square as an example to others, and you will save your soul. And if you insist on your innocence, then we regard this as possession by the devil, and therefore, in order to save your soul and evict the devil, we will torture you. But if you don't repent, even in this case, then in order to save your soul, we will have to burn you alive in the square, as an example to others. And your actions? And when the law enforcement system too often works in the mode of Holy Inquisition, neglecting the procedure code, and this applies to everyone, investigators, inspectors who violate it, prosecutors who must enforce the rule of law, judges who turn a blind eye to the fact that the rules of the procedure code were violated during the investigation, law enforcement officers themselves destroy the presumption of trust in the law enforcement system, and the presumption of trust in every one of them within the society. Accordingly, the requirement to address a judge as Your Honor is in this version simply an act of psychological pressure on the defendant and on everyone else, because, in fact, the law enforcement system, operating in such a mode, cannot be respected for anything, because honor is not inherent for such officers. In such a situation, it so happens that the people of the system work for the order. The order can be inertial, that is, the system works in this mode, and in fact, no one is to blame, because this is its mode. But the order can also be personal, that is, there really is an orderer of the case. The orderer wants to get a certain court verdict. How he pays for this is another matter. But if the investigation proceeds through a violation of the CPC, the Criminal Procedure Code, if the prosecutor's office turns a blind eye to the violation of the CPC, if the court makes a verdict knowing that the CPC was violated, and, turning a blind eye to this, then a system arises in society when unspoken codes are above the law. And in fact, due to the conflict of unspoken codes, self-evidences, and the current legislation, society is drawn into a governorial crisis, out of which there are actually two ways, because one variant is politicians and law enforcement officers who force the law enforcement systems to work in the first mode, when life situations correspond to the current legislation. And court verdicts and administrative actions proceed in accordance with the principle of full mutual correspondence of events in life to their description in the law. Or the crisis is aggravated. A social catastrophe occurs. The current juridical system is demolished. Something arises in the form of the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission, which at the first stages acts exclusively according to unspoken codes. And jurists, who with their unprincipled and principled position that allows them to violate the current legislation, have brought society into the catastrophe, should not be surprised that they will be judged not by the law, but according to unspoken codes. And in order for everything to be more or less good, state power must take care that the unspoken codes that take shape in society are previous, because if this does not happen, then there will be lawlessness, excessive cruelty. Such is the correlation of objective laws, self-evidences, from which one cannot get away in life, with written legislation and law enforcement practice. Next, we need to turn to the work of Ivan Antonovich Efremov. If you read the Andromeda Nebula, and the hour of the bull, then you will notice that among the authorities in the society that Efremov describes, there is another authority that is absent in our society, which is not provided for by our legislation. This is the Council of Honor and Right. The functions of the Council of Honor and Right is to consider situations in which the legislation has been violated. According to the law, there should be some punishment, but the violator insists that due to the violation of this law, some socially beneficial effect was achieved. At first glance, it's absurd, if you remain in the traditions of juridical thinking which has taken shape to date. But if you look at society as an object of governance from the standpoint of the sufficiently general theory of governance, then legislation describes governance towards standard situations, a certain plurality of standard situations. Then the question arises, there may be non-standard situations in which the norms of current legislation, stupid adherence to them, lead to some damage. Yes, there may be such situations. Non-standard situations, in fact, should be quite rare, but they are inevitable, and acting in them in accordance with the law can really cause some damage to society, to nature. And accordingly, violation of the law leads to the achievement of a positive effect, at least in the form of the absence of damage, which is inevitable when following the law. But this is a crime because the law has been violated, and the fact that Ivan Antonovich foresaw this Council of Honor and Right, which, without looking back at the legislation, examines the situation in its essence and determines whether it is good for society or not. This is a really necessary thing. The second side of the question, related to the Council of Honor and Right, is that if society develops, then many relevant standard situations, which are provided for by the current legislation, change. And accordingly, the old law can put brakes on social development, and stupid adherence to the law can harm society. Correspondingly, the question arises about the abolition of certain provisions of the legislation, and accordingly, the Council of Honor and Right, being a supra-law body, has the right to demand that legislators revise the current legislation and work out some other legislative norms that would be relevant in the changed circumstances of social life. This is what one really needs to know, and what should be generally understood by everyone who takes training courses in political science and sociology, theory of state and law, and other jurisprudence, because otherwise the mafia of jurists, professional mafias of jurists, may turn out to be one of the mafias which is most dangerous and harmful for the development of society. Moreover, I emphasize once again that in this context the word mafia does not at all mean the antisocial and criminal nature of the activities of any group of people, because it's inherent for people to generate mafias in the process of communication. If they have certain interests, these interests are quite stable over time, at long intervals. The interests of some people coincide with the interests of other people, or mutually supplement each other. Whether we want it or not, nonetheless, people, connected with these kinds of interests, will generate systems of unformalized communication with a minimum of documentation, which operate on the basis of self-evidences. And this is typical for all professional spheres of activity, including jurists. They are no exception. They are the same as everyone else. This is a certain sphere of professional activity, and in it there also emerge certain mafias, which act on the basis of self-evidences that have taken shape in this sphere of professional activity. And if these self-evidences are effective, or express nraviously vicious interests, then society is doomed to be a hostage and victim of the law enforcement system, which will systematically violate the natural rights of citizens. Further, if we look at the development of society, if we proceed from the fact that society should move towards a situation where all people, by the time they come of age, factually by biological maturity, will guaranteedly become carriers of the human type of psyche structure, their creative potential will be mastered by them, their will realize creative potential under the power of the dictatorship of Soviet. It must be assumed that the criminal code will not be in demand, due to the absence of those corpora delicti that are present in them now. Does this mean that in the case of such a development, jurisprudence and the law enforcement system will disappear? No. A difficult life will continue to require guaranteed solution to many everyday problems in inherently safe ways, in ways leading to results and efficiency in the sense of minimum energy consumption of labor resources, everything else. In other words, legislation, as a system of structureless governance, as an organization of structureless governance, of various spheres of activity, will continue to operate. A professional group will be needed that knows the legislation, knows life, and is able to govern the flow of events in life through this legislation. Well, in general, this means that the juridical system will simply be an extension of what now is commonly called the system of standardization and certification of products and services. In fact, it is now a divorced part of the juridical system, which goes mainly beyond economic activity. Well, this is also an instrument of state governance, and one must correctly understand that the system of standardization and certification of products and services is one of the elements of the juridical system of the state, which is necessary and must work. But here questions also arise. How should the system of standardization and certification of products and services work? Firstly, it should be, because if you expect 220 volts in the power point, and for some reason it's not 220 volts that lives there, but something very far beyond the limit of which the creators of electrical equipment for different purposes implemented their design ideas, there will be a very big catastrophe. Screws, nuts have to correspond to each other. Therefore, the system of standardization and certification of products is also a necessary element and is part of the juridical system, if we consider it as a system of governance towards the affairs of society in a structureless way. Here too there are problems of functional operability, because if you turn to such a sphere of activity as governance towards product quality, then in general, the majority of Russians in Russia will agree with me that Russian products should say, "Be careful, mine's made in Russia," because the quality leaves much to be desired, and it should be admitted that attempts to implement the ISO 9000 system of international quality standards in Russia did not lead to the expected results. What are the reasons? The reasons are the same as in general jurisprudence, the non-correlation of texts with life. Because if you set the task of improving the quality of products in your enterprise, what is required of you for this? First, you must create a set of requirements for products that will provide this level of quality. Second, you must implement this set of requirements for products in a construction that does not drop this level of quality by its structural defects. Further on, in order to bring the construction to life, you must provide it with technologies and organization of production, and accordingly, at this level, if you have created a set of technologies, ensured technological discipline, then your products will be 100% high quality, on condition that you receive from suppliers high quality components, raw materials, services, and so on and so forth. It is this incoming set that provides you with the quality of products, on condition that you maintain technological discipline and maintain the product in accordance with the constructions that are laid into it by the ingredient composition if there is no construction as such. But what you consume is someone else's product, and in order to ensure the quality of your products, you must provide incoming inspection. But incoming inspection is also a vague concept, and in its most maximum form it looks like this. You have to check every copy of the consignments received by you in batches of components, and as a result, the cost of your products will grow incredibly due to the fact that the cost of incoming inspection will be extremely high. But if we rise to the level of the macroeconomic system as a whole, then this problem is solved by minimizing incoming inspection at all enterprises. But firms appear that certify the system of governance towards quality at all enterprises. What should these firms really do? The system of standards describes some general principles that guarantee that the quality of products will be at a level not lower than declared in mass production statistics. Firms that certify the system of quality towards governance for businesses in a normally functioning economy, in the market, they sell their honesty and competence in the sphere of technology, constructions, and other things. They don't sell certificates. They don't sell documentation which must be presented to inspectors or potential customers of the enterprise of this or that product. Yes, there are certificates. Yes, there is documentation. But the quality is ensured by the fact that the firm checks the correspondence of the technological process with what is written in the technological documentation. If the technological process is carried out in accordance with the documentation, then a certificate will be issued saying that the system of governance towards quality at the enterprise exists and is ensured. Yes, the certificate will be issued for a certain period. Yes, the customer can conduct an independent audit of the system of quality of governance. But in the course of the audit, it is not the formalism prescribed in the documents of the system of governance towards quality that is checked, but the correspondence of the organization of the technology with what is prescribed in the system of governance towards quality that is checked. If this is ensured, then the quality will be there, the system can work. And then, buying products from a certified enterprise for the needs of your own production, you can be sure that there will be no defects in your products due to the efficiency of components and raw materials that you buy from other suppliers. In other words, these are again the questions with which I started. What is legislation? How does it correlate to life? And there are two variants. Either we correlate factual events with what is in the legislation and govern them on the basis of mutual correspondence of what is written in the law and with what happens in life, or we use legislation in order to give legal force to some discretionary decisions, which in the end may have nothing to do with priviousness, with the needs of society, with the rights of people declared in constitutions, in international treaties, with everyday concepts of social priviousness. So this is where the theme of the legal system of the state, the juridical system, is completed. Then comes the concretics. Further, it is necessary to analyze the current legislation, starting from the constitutions of those states that are of interests. But the general principles are as mentioned above. On this theme, today's lecture can be considered finished. And further, we move on to the questions that have accumulated since January. As in the previous lectures, I did not answer the questions because the thematics was more time-consuming than now. Therefore, the questions are old. Some of the events that are mentioned are already forgotten by many. So, in January, the Gaidar Forum took place in Moscow. Dmitry Anatolyevich Medvedev spoke at the forum. He said the following thing: even statistics are a certain dead end. Everyone is asking questions of how to correctly calculate the gross domestic product and whether it's necessary to calculate it. It may be time to abandon this indicator in order to adequately reflect the state of the economy. The first thing that catches the eye: did Dmitry Anatolyevich, when he was studying, do tests or exams in probability theory and mathematical statistics? Or is it just a figurative expression? Even statistics are at a dead end. But nevertheless, how to calculate the gross domestic product, and is it necessary to calculate it? The answer to this question stems from the approaches of the sufficiently general theory of governance to the economy as an object of governance. If we correlate with the fact that the satisfaction of any needs of people entails some consequences, then the consequences can be divided into two classes. Satisfaction of the needs of people is safe for people who consume certain products and services, safe for those who produce these products and services, and does not exert a destructive impact on the biosphere. And there are needs, the satisfaction of which harms consumers, harms others, harms the biosphere, harms those who produce these products and services. There are needs that can wander from one group to the other, depending on the volume within the boundaries of which they are satisfied, because something can be safe in certain quantities and dangerous in case of lack or excess. This approach means that all products that society consumes and produces fall into two classes: demographically conditioned needs, the satisfaction of which is alternatively necessary for the development of society. They do not harm people and do not destroy the biosphere. And degradational parasitic needs that damage people and destroy the biosphere. Right now, everything is being dumped indiscriminately into the gross domestic product. When the European Commission decided that it was necessary to take into account the income from prostitution, drug addiction, the gross national product of Greece immediately increased by 2%. Has the quality of life in Greece improved as a result of the 2% increase in the gross national product in this way? No. Therefore, we do not need to engage in this verbal fornication. We simply need to understand. what in our consumption belongs to degradational parasitic needs, what belongs to demographically conditioned needs. And the gross domestic product should be calculated only on the basis of the demographically conditioned spectrum of needs. Everything that belongs to the degradational parasitic spectrum of needs should be taken into account too. It should not belong to the gross domestic product, however, but to the errors of social governance. But Dmitry Anatolyevich related an omelette recipe and elevated this recipe to the rank of a systemic problem. Second, there is one more problem that could be mentioned here. Within the walls of the Academy of State Service, this is the shortage of relevant competencies in the state apparatus, right up to municipalities. In sectoral departments, in the law enforcement system, according to some data, we need to retrain at least 1 million specialists. This means that the corresponding programs have to be developed as quickly as possible. Moreover, the subject that will be taught is developing at a cosmic speed. In addition, this challenge is facing the entire system of traditional education. School children and students now often speak with their teachers, literally in different languages, and this question, of course, should be addressed not to school children, but to their mentors. If there is a shortage of governors, competent governors, then it should be admitted that the Academy of State Service of the Higher School of Economics has been engaged in nonsense for more than 20 years. If we talk about what they should do, then in fact, these educational institutions should give their graduates adequate ideas about the objective laws in each of the 6 groups I mentioned earlier, to which the life of society is subordinate. They should know the sufficiently general theory of governance and be able to apply it to solving various kinds of governorial tasks. If they continue to be brainwashed with management and all inadequate things in the sphere of economics and governance, then nothing good will come out of it. Third, radical transformations of the labor market and related changes in the social sphere. Many experts even talk about the crisis of traditional employment, about a colossal rise in unemployment among workers with low and medium qualifications. On the other hand, platform technologies can help those who have lost their jobs. They provide unlimited opportunities for the use of labor, and in order to get employment in various forms, firstly, it is remote employment, secondly, underemployment, and thirdly, self-employment. This is an expression of a clear non-understanding of what is going on. The development of the technosphere leads to the fact that over time, a relatively small proportion of the population will be able to produce everything necessary for the life of society as a whole. And in this case, the question will inevitably arise of what to do with the population that cannot be employed in the sphere of production and in the sphere of state governance. Fabricating new needs will not work, because demographically conditioned needs are limited. Well, this is most clearly seen in the example of our nutrition needs. Everything that is not able to be assimilated by the cells of the organism goes to feed the microorganisms, for which our organisms are the habitat. The more we feed them, the more diseased we ourselves are. This concerns everything. Even if we talk about purely psychological needs, then no computer games, simulations of some kind of reality, should not occupy one's time. And in many ways they are harmful to the psyche and to health in general. In other words, these two factors, the limitedness of demographically conditioned needs and the growth of the production of social labor, they put us before the question that it is necessary to change the way of life of civilization as a whole, so that a person not only gets free time, but also has the skills to use it for the blago of himself, for the blago of children, loved ones. Because in fact the most precious thing we have is the communication of people with each other, but not at all the self-realization of oneself in some profession, in some kind of creativity. Yes, this is also necessary, but it's only necessary as one of the aspects of personal communication. The head of the Regional Duma of the Novgorod region stated, "After 30 years, it is not a woman who needs money, but a baby." The Novgorod female head said that payments for the firstborn will be given to mothers up to the age of 29. The question is, does the baby need money regardless of the age of the mother? Well, he doesn't need money himself, he doesn't know how to use it, but he needs a lot of things that are bought in our society for money. Therefore the question arises, with what and about what this official thinks, and is she capable of thinking, especially since she is not alone? Further, In Altai, the head of the Regional Department of Youth Policy and Implementation of Social Development Programs condemned the exaggerated demands of young specialists who do not want to receive a small salary at the start of their careers. Here the question is not about a small salary, but the question is whether the salary is enough for a young person to live independently, build a new family, ensure the development of children, ensure his professional growth, in order to receive, by measure of growth of qualifications and professionalism, a higher salary. So if we pose the question this way, the official does not even understand what is really happening in society. Yes, there are people who want everything at once, but for the most part, these are not hard laborers who graduate from universities, go to work in the real sector of the economy, in medicine, in schools. Mostly offspring of the elite, those born with a silver spoon in their mouth, who really don't know how to do anything by themselves, and if they find themselves in a tribe ancestral system, in positions with good salaries, then others have to work for them, and they can only sign where they are shown, and they simply put tasks for subordinates in the mode of, I don't know what I really want, but I want it to be good. Therefore, you decide what is good and do it. During the direct line, Putin said the following, answering one of the questions. You know, by and large, it is better not to rely on some fairy tale characters. Remember, in Soviet times there was a song. No one will help us, neither God, nor the Tsar, nor the hero. We must do everything with our own hands. Therefore, if we wait for miracles from the golden fish, then in the end, we may end up like in Pushkin's fairy tale, left with nothing. It is better to work with our sleeves rolled up. Yes, this is true. There is only one circumstance. The golden fish honestly fulfills its promises, which cannot be said about the protracted period of waiting for the benefits of the reforms with which Gaidar, Chubais, and others like them began, and which in fact an ordinary citizen cannot smell in his life experience until now. Further questions. Question 1. Volume 1 of Fundamentals of Sociology says, however, this does not mean that he is emotionless, and that he does not pay attention to anything that happens. It is with the above-described emotion-meaning structure, in a state of calm, solemn joy, that the coming anxiety caused by actually occurring negative events is realized most clearly and in advance. The quote ended. Now the question is, does it mean that a person anyway experiences negative emotions in grief of despondency and despair, fear and other things? A person does not experience despondency as such, despair, fear and so on. Simply, if he maintains an emotion-meaning structure, then the situation when cats scratch his soul, or some premonitions of something negative arise, they are comprehended most clearly and distinctly. After that, he can start unpacking these emotional outbursts. What events are behind them? What possibilities are behind them? But it doesn't mean that a person is immersed in despondency, despair, fear, and so on. If this happens, this is a loss of the emotion-meaning structure. Further, he continues the question. For example, if a mother has lost her child, tell her that it's better to regress from attachment than to be a slave of it. It is not exclusive that she lost her child also for the reason that she was attached. And also tell her that she needs to rejoice, because God is infallible. Yes, God is infallible. But if you let your emotions go, then nothing good will happen. Being in power of emotions is one thing, but being able to maintain an emotion-meaning structure in the flow of events, and to meaningfully react to all events, including negative ones, is another. Question 2. The accusation was made that the human type of psyche structure is precisely in conflict with the nature of man himself. To this there is Kluchevsky's answer, saying what now teachers understand by the nature of man is only an anti-natural perversion of the nature of man, and cultured animals, this is feral man. In general, emotions are inherent in people. A person can maintain an emotion-meaning structure himself. Yes, there are disasters and griefs in life, but they should be treated from the standpoint of the human type of psyche structure, and the emotion-meaning structure, in which the initial message is, the Almighty is infallible. Everything that has happened in the best possible way. Question 3. The question arose concerning the functional operability of applying the energy standard of a payment unit in real life. When using the calculation method, which is the ratio of the annual volume of electricity production to the volume of means of payment in circulation, it turns out that the energy potential is expressed in annual terms, and the volume of means of payment in circulation, in essence, is expressed in the parameter that characterizes the repeated maintenance of the production cycle throughout the year in different sectors. Further, the introduction of money supply into circulation in the production-consumption system is carried out in proportion to the volume of energy input. As a result of the application of this formula in the economy, there appears a need for a sharp reduction in the money supply, since the calculation of the energy supply standard is made as a ratio of various multi-qualitatives. Question: is it not more correct to calculate the standard as the ratio of the annual volume of the final product produced to the volume of energy consumed within the year of this product, and then regulate the volume of the means of payment depending on the volume of introduction of electricity into the production-consumption system of the consumption of the final product? The energy standard was introduced the way it was introduced. Why? Because this is the easiest way to get it. And in the form in which it was introduced, it generally meets the governorial tasks that it must solve, namely, to regulate the emission policy. All the detailedness, such as the number of transactions in every sector, the speed of money supply through the sector, these are small details that don't really matter in relation to the tasks of governing emission policy. Because the speed of money flow through any sector is determined by the duration of the technological cycle in this sector, and the technological cycle changes in relation to the duration of the technological cycle. It changes slowly, since it's conditioned by the organizational and scientific technological progress in this sector. Accordingly, in relation to the task of emission policy, that is, how much money to put into circulation, what emission rates are acceptable and which are unacceptable. As a control parameter, the energy standard in the form in which it's introduced in the conception can perform its role well. Question 4. Can a person who does not have full physical health, in principle, acquire humanness? Or will the process of acquiring humanness by him be accompanied by the healing of the physical body? This depends on what kind of bodily health disorders one has, because in some cases, the development of the personal psyche will improve the health indicators. The problems will go away. In some cases, severe organic lesions will make it impossible for a person to realize his potential in this life. Therefore, all this is concretics. Question 5. The conception is criticized for the fact that there are few women among its supporters. If this practice is fair, then is it the reason that the conception of social safety suggests that the woman also be ready to be, not necessarily that it will be so, of course, alone and childless, but an emotionally self-sufficient person? In my opinion, with such a proposal, the conception of social safety turns out to be below the needs of the overwhelming majority of women. Or am I wrong? In fact, the conception has a negative relation towards the position of child-free. The conception says that the best family variant is a large family of several generations. Yes, not everyone is able to come to such a family, open a window of opportunity in order to build it. This is largely conditioned by the fact that the Russian post-Soviet statehood is not completely sovereign, almost completely not sovereign, in matters of economy and finance, and therefore we cannot really aggress from the regime of economic genocide in relation to the overwhelming majority, primarily the Russian population. But to say that the conception says that people should remain alone and childless, you did not understand the conception. Question 6. My opinion is that a person cannot become a human as such if he or she does not find his or her soulmate. The human type of psyche structure is not conditioned by whether you have found your soulmate or not. The human type of psyche structure is your internal endeavor. But of course, the quality of your life alone will not be the same as the quality of your life if you meet your soulmate, and develop with her or him, give birth to children, raise them as humans. Question 7. The film Equilibrium shows a society without emotional people. The film even says, "Now only our Soviet guides us." An emotionally self-sufficient person is not deprived of feed-forward lines in the form of emotions that speak about what is good and what is bad. After all, No matter what meaning a person consciously comprehends, the emotions are the same: joy, openness to the world, etc. Then there is no emotional difference between good and bad. It turns out to be the same as is shown in the film, a feelingless society. I don't understand how one can feel shame if one feels joy, openness to the world, and so on. The zombie type of psyche structure also doesn't imply emotions in some cases. The machine is emotionless. It has a program. Emotions are prescribed by the program if they are prescribed. The human type of psyche structure anyway presupposes the correspondence of emotions to meaning. In order for everything to be good, the emotion meaning structure is set according to the tuning fork. The Almighty is infallible. Everything that happens happens in the best possible way, according to the enraviousness and ethics inherent for the people. If you are attuned into such an emotion meaning correspondence, then your senses, your intellect, begin to work in the best possible mode. Question 8. If something happens as a result of which the emotion meaning structure changes, some negative emotions appear, what does this mean? This really means that somewhere something has either already happened, not the way you would like, or possibilities have opened up, meaning that there will be something wrong in the future. What should be done in this case? In this case, you need to understand why your emotions have changed. That is, a meaning should appear that explains why the emotions have gone from the right state to the wrong one. After you can detect this meaning, you will be able, in the vast majority of cases, to react to this meaning in advance. And emotions will be of the right nature, even in grief. If it is something of a griefly nature, it will anyway be bright, because souls are eternal. Our bodies are not intended for eternal life. If you have created the right emotion meaning structure, and an emotional message comes against its background, you can unpack this meaning, understand it, work out a meaningful, conscious relation towards it, and behave correctly in life. If you just dwell in these emotions, which no one knows how formed in you, or were neatly formed by someone, then your level of functional capability in life will be minimal. If you don't master the emotion meaning structure, then in life your organism is almost the same as an untuned piano in music. Even kinematically correct keystrokes will not produce the music you want. Question 9. Starting a family based on instinct and then finding love is no better than starting a family based on love, contrary to instincts. Is it not in the first case that instinct is satisfied and God is satisfied? And why does man need instincts if God has not put incomprehensible desires into our souls? Why man needs instincts I told you at the very beginning. We are a part of the biosphere. Culture is variable. If culture is at a zero level, or culture has degraded, it is disintegrating, then the instincts ensure the reproduction of the biomass of the species Homo sapiens, and thereby preserve the potential of development. But if a person is in the power of instincts, today he creates one family on the basis of instincts, tomorrow instincts burst out again, the present family is destroyed, the children are unhappy. A new family is again created on the basis of instincts, and no one knows how long it will last. Is this the life of man? Yes, it may happen that the family is created on the basis of instincts, but then, when love comes, the quality of life changes in any case. Instincts anyway take their place. Instinctive behavioral programs will anyway work. You can't get away from this. A lot of things in our behavior are conditioned by instincts. If you turn them off, then the question arises of prosthetics of instincts with something else, and in general, in some subcultures, biological degeneration has gone far enough so that it's necessary to teach people what should be realized on the basis of instincts automatically. Question 10. In the 6th lecture, you talked about the northern creative type of worldview, according to Gennady Semyonovich Churin. The world is Dobrius. Any unpraviousness, even Hitler, should be taken as a task from a beloved teacher. However, there are two more types of civilization. The West, the world is evil, and it needs to be conquered, destroyed. The East, the world is neutral, you need to fence off from the world, achieve nirvana, and so on. In my opinion, the process of cognition consists of three components: the cognition of the new, the destruction of the old, and the preservation of the best. Such a scheme of cognition fits well into three civilizations: the North, the cognition of the new, work in difficult conditions. The West, destruction of the old, testing, advertising, striving for comfort. The East, preserving the best, mass production, striving for stability. Thus, even the destructive aspiration of the West can be directed towards blago for everyone. The question is, are all three worldviews of civilization necessary on the planet, or will only the northern type remain in the future? You see, even if we talk about the cognition of the new never takes place from scratch. The new appears as the conscious comprehension of the fact that with the old something is not right. Well, then the question is, what is wrong? And in answer to the question of what is wrong, you can turn towards the path of degradation and destroy the best, or you can go along the path of development and get rid of the mistakes of the past. In any case, when it comes to cognition, then one should not confuse scaffolding with a constructed building. When the building is completed, the scaffolding must be removed. The unused building materials must somehow be redirected or disposed of. And in my understanding, both the West and the East, each in their own way, deviate from the mission of God's successorship on earth as a mission predetermined for man. The northern type of civilization is not even the northern one, it just is what it is, because the civilizational ideal of the mission of God's successorship on earth has not been eradicated from us. No matter how we live, having tried both the East and the West on ourselves, we still remain ourselves, and we integrate the best, and we reject what prevents us from not living life capably. And the East and West, due to the fact that they deviate from the mission of God's successorship, choosing for themselves a different mission, the West is to create comfort here, the East is to escape from here to nirvana, merge with the Absolute. They supply us with the material that we must rethink and implement in our project of the future, in which the world is really Dobrius, and all the troubles are an opportunity to make this world a better place, which should be implemented. Question 11. How is it possible that a person wants to remain alone and at the same time childless, and remaining alone and childless, he should not worry about it, become human? Is such a person not a schizophrenic? You see, wanting to remain alone and childless is a wrong thing, but destiny may be that someone will have to remain alone and childless for various reasons, and by strength of different objectives, which, as opportunities, are offered to him from above in this destiny. You should accept any destiny in a human way, regardless of what it is. This destiny, alone and childless, or you will manage to build a family of many generations and become a happy great-great-great-great-grandfather or great-great-great-grandmother for your offspring. Question 12. You say that genetics, in the change of generations, adapts to the nutrition that has developed in people living in these natural geographical conditions. S. Zamalieva and Greenplant, referring to Western scientists, say the opposite. Over the past 50,000 years, man has not genetically changed, and accordingly, his organism is tuned to the type of food that has supported him throughout this period: wild fruits, roots, seeds, and occasionally meat. None of you give evidence of your assertions. Who is right? I'm inclined to your point of view. Otherwise, the Eskimos would not have been able to survive in the conditions of the far north. You see, humanity is heterogeneous precisely because it lives in different natural geographic conditions. Nutrition in the absence of global trade, global product exchange. When in winter we start eating springberries and fruits, brought from the opposite hemisphere where the change of seasons is opposite to ours. This is a relatively recent cultural heritage. Back in the 20th century, for the most part, people consumed most of the food products that they had at their place of residence, and they were also produced there. Further on, you see, here are the questions of performance speed. Adaptation to natural conditions and to those conditions that life offers. It turns out that all biological species adapt to slowly changing conditions through genetic adaptation. That is, the mechanism of natural selection works, and those specimens that are genetically better tuned to certain natural and geographical conditions, one of which is the nutrition offered by the biosphere, have advantages. They are more fertile, less diseased. There's no getting away from this. It should be like this, simply due to the pan-biospheric objective laws. And culture, as a factor of the environment, is also something to which a person, in some way, genetically adapts if culture changes slowly. But there are changes in the natural environment to which every specimen has to adapt. And the possibilities of adaptation, in this case, are not genetically determined. Either you adapt or nature kills you. Now, with regard to genetic research, human genetics is not limited to chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA. There is also a biofield component. Western medicine and Western biology does not want to know anything about this, and due to the fact that it does not want to know, it does not know this. In addition, man's psyche does not take shape at the moment of birth, where a person is born and he already has a full-fledged psyche. The psyche takes shape over the long years of growing up. The genetic program works, the genetic program is interactive. And this genetic program provides what can be called the imprinting component of the psyche. This is the effect of the first impression. And it affects, among other things, taste preferences. I came across a description of such an experiment conducted at the VDNKH. Ice cream of two types is sold. One is made according to the old Soviet recipes, natural cream, all ingredients are natural, there is nothing like E2, E4, but there is just a natural product. The second ice cream is a product of modern chemistry, substitutes, emulsifiers, stabilizers, preservatives, and everything else. People taste both. Then it turns out that those on whom they tried both types of ice cream were divided into two groups. Adults and the elderly, who tried ice cream for the first time in Soviet childhood, they liked the ice cream of the Soviet recipes, and those who started eating ice cream from Baskin-Robbins plasticine. Those didn't like the ice cream made according to the Soviet recipe. That is, the imprinting component, it exists. It differs from the genetically determined component of our psyche by the fact that it takes shape in a certain cultural environment. But it also has something in common with the innate component in the sense, the innate component is unchangeable. The imprinting component, after it has been formed, is very difficult or impossible to change. Therefore, what in our preferences is conditioned by genetics, what is conditioned by culture, what conditioned by culture is the imprinting component, this is a question for research. And in every natural geographic environment, the answer to it may be slightly different. But the fact that no one can cancel the pan-biological objective laws, even for the reason that he does not know them, or knows in some limited ways, i.e. genetics is only chromosomal, well, it leaves an imprint. Question 13. In the works Favorable Wind of Almightiness, Dead Water, it is said that it's very useful to be alone with your thoughts for at least an hour a day. The processes of information transformation, taking place at the unconscious levels of the psyche, lead to the elimination of its flaws. You can turn on tranquil classical music. Tell me, at this time, can you think about your current tasks? Can you put these tasks before your unconscious levels of the psyche? Ask yourself questions about nraviousness, ethics, answer them, keep a diary, expressing your thoughts. Or is it better to relax at this time, not to think about anything, just following the flow of thoughts? Is it better to lie down, walk, maybe dance? It all depends on the concretics, because one and another and the third, this is to be alone with your thoughts. Sometimes you need to relax and see what emerges from the unconscious levels of the psyche. Sometimes you need to set tasks for them. But that it is necessary, this is a fact. Question 14. If love and passions are incompatible, then you propose to make children dispassionately, without pleasure. I have never said that. Love is the bond of perfectness, but it is not a loss of self-mastery.